So previously we have done a little bit of an exercise on pigment strength and kind of touched on pulling the bead, but now I want to show you some different methods, kind of classic methods on how to apply paint to paper. In this first exercise we did some light pigment, some medium pigment, and some dark pigment. And we did it twice just to make sure we could do it and repeat the process. I have my setup here. Let me just explain what I have going. I have a bin of water, actually 2 bins of water, separate bins, and then I have my palette set up here. The way I set up my palette is I tend to put my yellows off there because they get messed up pretty easily with other paints. Okay. So lemon yellow or Hansa yellow light is what I have. I have a Hansa yellow medium, Hansa yellow deep. Raw sienna is my favorite yellow ochre color. Raw sienna light by Daniel Smith. This is Paranone orange, which is more of a redder orange. Quinacridone coral. Pearl red. Quinacridone rose. Crimson lake by Holbein. Ultramarine rose, no, rose of ultramarine by Daniel Smith, cobalt blue violet by Daniel Smith, manganese blue hue by Daniel Smith, cobalt blue, I believe that's Holbein, it might be Daniel Smith, ultramarine light by Holbein, Daniel Smith phthalo blue green shade, and Daniel Smith cascade green. Over here I have Holbein's yellow ochre. I have my favorite kind of orangey brown, which is transparent orange, payroll orange by Daniel Smith. I put in some Payne's blue gray. This is quinacridone burnt orange. This is a different, I got a sample tube of Qors, QORs, cobalt blue. I want to try that out. I have Indian Throne Blue by Daniel Smith, and I have Wisteria, which is an opaque. I have 3 opaques. Wisteria by Daniel Smith, Lavender by Holbein, and White, Titanium White by Daniel Smith. So that's how my palette is set up. And I have extra paints over here, kind of my standard palette, primaries and secondaries over here, and just some sexy new colors I might want to try or fiddle with over on this side of the palette. So we're ready to begin some ideas about how to apply paint to paper. If we're a beginner, this will be very helpful. If you've been painting a while, this might be a nice review, but we need to really discuss how to get paint to paper. So, and the focus is going to be on the fundamental topic of value. So, just a couple other mentions. I always have a kind of a terry towel close to my palette so that I can keep the water regulated on my brush really well. And I often use a palette knife to mix up paint because it's easier than keeping my brush clean, and then I don't have to have more than one brush. I've given my palette a pretty good cleaning this morning, and I resist doing that for a long time, but I think it's good to go. So I have all my paint set up as I discussed, but I want to use some fresh paint so I can get a lot of it very quickly without too much trouble. So I'm going to do the Holbein ultramarine blue on both of these papers that I have pre-taped to corrugated plastic easel board. And I want to do a kind of a variegated wash. So I'm also going to bring in a red, and I'm going to use my cooler red, which is, in my case, that's permanent rose, quinacridone rose by Daniel Smith. And I'm going to prepare my paints ahead of time by getting them damp. Some of this is fresh paint, some of it's not. But I just kind of want my paint to be wet before I start painting. I notice I have a hair in there. Sometimes I can't get those out. Should always have some nice tweezers on board. I have cats, so I tend to get a lot of hair in my work. I just call it creative. Okay, so I'm going to use my ultramarine light by Holbein, and I'm going to go ahead and work with fresh paint. I'm going to put it in this. I'm going to just squeeze out a little bit of paint. And then I want to use my quinacridone rose in another one. This tends to be my red pile. And then I'm going to put some of both in a third bin. And I want to get a whole bunch of tea strength paint. So you remember we talked about the strength of paint being weak. You kind of think of tea. I'm going to drop one, maybe 2 splashes of water into each. And to get started, I'm going to use my palette knife because it's easier to clean off. And I want to get up quite a bit of paint ready to go. And I have a little dip in my palette here that can be good and also a little bit annoying because I want to make sure I've got all my paint mixed up nice and smoothly and evenly. Okay, I wipe off my palette knife with a paper towel, and then I'll mix up the next color. Quinacridone. All of these paints both of these pigments are extremely transparent. I would consider this my high value red and my low value blue, and this is cool, and this the red is cool and the blue is warm, and I want to get a kind of a purple in between color. So I'm going to have all these being adjacent colors or analogous colors it's sometimes called, and I want to do kind of a design. Okay, so I have my paint mixed up, and I want to have a lot of it so that I don't run out. I've got a piece of paper over here that I would say is about, I don't know, 7 by 6 or 5.5 by 7.5 or something like that. And on one of them, I'm going to pre-treat it with water. Before I move on, I want to make sure I get my cap back on here so I don't spill water all over a painting. And get that up out of my way. So I'm right-handed, so I want to keep my painting area pretty free of clutter. So I want to make sure this gets over on my left side so that I'm not tripping over it when I'm trying to paint. So I've got nice clean water and a nice clean brush, and so I want to do one of these with water on the surface. Now I'm working the back side of Arsh's 140-pound cold press. You can work both sides. You're supposed to work on the smoother side, and I previously did a painting I didn't like, so I'm going to use the back side to practice, do some practicing. So I want to first just wet one of these surfaces ahead of time, and then I want to let that surface dry back a little bit. I want to make sure I don't have any dry spots. I'm going to get it completely covered. So the right side of the paint paper is the smooth side, but for years I thought it was the other side. So I've been painting on the wrong side of the paper for years, and all my paintings have been just fine. It's a little rougher. That's okay. So I'm going to set that aside while I work this paint. So this paper I don't have to pre-treat, but we're going to use the same method on both pieces. One of them is just going to be a damp surface, and the other is going to be a dry surface. And this one I want it to be damp, not wet. So I have to let the sheen go away before I can do any more painting on that. But the key is I wanted to make sure I have my paint ready before I start to get ready to paint so that I don't run out. So what I'm going to do is a variegated flat wash. So got all three colors about the same strength, tea strength pigment, and I'm going to change colors in the wash as we go. And one thing that's kind of fun, maybe I want to do this at an angle. Well, I'm not going to do it at an angle because I'm going to let gravity work in my favor. I'm set up at a slant, a slight slant, 15 to 20 degrees, so that the paint will flow down the paper. I'm going to start with the red, and I'm going to just get one of my methods. I'm working the side of my brush mostly. Really scoop up the paint. I don't just want to tip my brush, tip in it. I want to really scoop up the paint. And then I want to let a bead form. You see that bead forming right there? I want that bead to form up. If it's uneven, I might want to tip my board to one side or another. Then I'm going to really load my brush with the same strength of pigment, and I'm going to catch the middle of that bead with my brush tip, and I'm going to come across. Now that's going to, looks like I missed a spot there, so I'm going to go over it really quickly while it's still wet, just to get a nice even flow of pigment. And I want that bead to form up. I don't want to wait too long. I want that bead to form up. Okay, I'll do one more pass. So I can do it this way, where I just do one stroke. I want to start on the tape and end on the tape and get a nice flat wash showing it. You want to make sure you get a good seal on your tape so the water doesn't go underneath. Okay, now I'm going to switch colors to the blue. So I'm going to clean my brush in between and then use my towel to get most of the water out. Now I'm going to load my blue brush with blue just like I did the red. There's a chunk of something in there I want to get out of the way. Really scoop it up like a shovel. Okay, and my bead's still forming, so I'm going to start with this other method where I do short, choppy strokes. My brush is staying on the paper the whole time, but barely touching the paper, so it's a really light touch. Now I'm going to reload that blue, and I'm going to clean up that stroke and come across like that. So now I'm going to get a soft transition from the red to the blue. Okay, I can tip, I'm going to resist the urge to go back up and fix things above me, because that's just going to create a lot of mess. And so this first pass, I'm just getting that white edge. I don't want to have any white left. Okay, let's do a couple more strokes of the blue. I'm going to get a nice soft variegated wash transition from red to blue. Okay, so we should have a third, a third, a third in terms of our colors. So blue. Okay, now I'm going to switch again to my purple color. So this is a combination of the two, so we're going to have a nice analogous harmonious painting because all the colors are adjacent on the color wheel. And I mixed a red and a blue that I thought would make a pretty purple color. Okay? And we're going to try to get all three colors the same pigment strength. Otherwise we'll end up with backgrounds. Okay? So there's two different methods. You can do the short choppy stroke where you keep your brush tip on the paper at all times, or you can do one stroke, clean it up. Okay, so now we finished the whole piece of paper. I'm going to get a fresh piece of paper towel, and I'm going to wipe off my tape all that excess paint. Just in case I bump my painting or something, I don't want that wet paint to flow back into my painting because it's going to cause what we call a back run. Down here, I want to suck up this extra bead so that it doesn't flow back up and push all the pigment out of the way. So I want to do that pretty quick. So I'm making my brush thirsty so the pigment will just jump right into the brush. I'm actually trying not to touch the painting. I'm going on the tape and letting the pigment or the watery pigment jump into my brush. Okay? And now I'm keeping a third eye on my other piece of paper over here. Get rid of all that extra water. Now I'm going to look and see what the status of my wet paper is. So, it's got a satin finish. It's no longer glossy, which is the state that I want, to see if it will hold the shape of the pigment, but maybe buy me a little more time so I don't get streaks. We'll see. Okay, so I'm going to do the same process. I'm going to start with the red. I got a little bit of warping because I'm at 140 pound and not 300 pound. Okay, so see how when it's damp it'll still hold that bead. Let's do a couple more strokes. Let's do one more stroke of the pure pinky red. So this is a cool red, quinacridone rose. Okay, now I'm going to switch to the blue just like I did before. I actually have quite a bit of pigment in there. It's slid down into the trough. Okay, once again I want to get the tip of my brush into the pigment. Go across. I'm using an extremely light touch. I can do the other method where I just pull it down very quickly. I don't bring my brush off my paper at all. Okay, I'm going to use a stroke to clean up that edge. If it drips down off the side, that's okay. Let's do a couple more strokes of the blue. If it drips down on a plate, that's why you want to start on the tape and end on the tape. So if it drips, perhaps it'll drip off the tape side and not down the middle of your paper. So see how when the paper is damp but not super wet, it will still hold the bead. But hopefully we'll get a little less streaky application of paint this way with a flat wash. So the darker the color, the harder it is to get a streakless wash. Okay, so I've switched to my purple now, my pre-mixed purpley color. And the bottom of the paper is a little wetter, so I want to be quick about that. Cleaning out my brush really well. I'm going to collect that extra water that's forming there at the bottom of the paper. So we're letting gravity do a lot of the work for us. So my critique of myself is I think my red was a little thicker than my other colors. I'm going to take my paper towel, find a clean spot, we'll wipe off the tape so that water doesn't flow into my painting and create a background. Trying not to touch the paper, the painting itself. Okay, I'm keeping an eye on this bead. It keeps, as the water flows down the paper, it'll accumulate at the bottom edge. I'm going to keep wiping that up. So we have two different flat washes, and when they're both dry, we'll evaluate which method do we like the best. And what did we do right, and what did we do wrong? So watercolor is about pigment strength and timing. It's kind of the hardest things to learn about watercolor. Pigment strength and timing are important because watercolor is a transparent medium. It's hard to cover up anything that happened before that you don't like, perhaps, because the next layer is going to be transparent. You're going to see through it much like stained glass. Okay, we'll stop this, and I could take a blow dryer to it and kind of speed the process, but I like it to dry naturally in most cases. One thing, if I apply a blow dryer, it tends to release the gum on the tape, and so I have to retape my painting. So I just let it dry naturally. It usually has a better response. I don't really want to push that paint around too much. Alright, so we can see our first wash is almost dry. This one you can still see a few warples in it, so it's probably not the right time to work on it. I've turned my heater on. I apologize for the sound a little bit, just to maybe have a little more drying efficiency in the studio. So I'm going to put this one aside so it can continue to dry. And now we'll work on the next layer. So I'm going to do this kind of design on here. And so we're going to save the first layer of values. So we want to paint around what we do here. And I want to paint negatively for this whole process. So I'm going to do a series of berries and leaves. And we'll eventually go back and back and back into the painting. But for this first layer, I'm going to just draw a couple of leaves. So on this layer, we want to make sure that whatever we draw does not connect to each other. I want them to be independent shapes. No overlapping on this first layer. Alright, so I want berries and leaves in this. So I've previously done this method, so I kind of know my subject. Again, I don't want any overlapping of shapes in the first layer. In any given layer, we don't want to overlap the shapes. So I don't want these berries to share the same shape, because it ends up having shape confusion for the final project. So I know that doesn't make a lot of sense right now, and I'm going to make pretty big berries so that I don't have to paint too many of them. Okay, and I think I don't want to have that coming at such a horizontal angle. So I have some berries there. I'm trying to think about composition and how it might work. I don't want too many shapes in this first layer, and I want all my shapes, maybe a leaf coming in off the side, maybe one peeking out up at the top. So I'm using my kneaded eraser and my number 2 pencil lead. So this will be what we save. We'll save this first layer. I think I won't put the stem in yet for the branch that's holding the 2 berries. And maybe I'll have another leaf. I don't want to point to the edge, so we'll have, and that's probably enough to save at the beginning. I don't know if I want that one, it's pretty centered, so I'll have it coming down like that. Okay, so now I'm going to use the same 3 colors that I used before. I'm setting my one where I did the wet first to the side while I work on this first flat wash. So I'm going to have the same 3 colors. And I can make the paint a little thicker if I want to for this layer, but not much. So again, I want to make sure I have a lot of pigment. Worst thing to do in the middle of a wash is to run out of pigment. So I think when I critique myself, the red might have been just a little bit thicker than the other. So I'm going to pull out some of this nice gooey blue, and I'm going to try to make sure I get it about the same strength and the same as much as I had before. So this is the Ultramarine Light by Holbein. And because I sprayed my paint, it's staying pretty moist. And this actually was one of my fresh paints. And then we'll use the same 2 colors over here. So I'm going to pull some of my rose in there, get it nice and mixed up. Maybe this time I'll make it a little more red violet than blue violet. Yeah, I think I'll do that. So I think I probably have enough at least to get through this painting. Maybe not both of them. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to paint around the shapes that we've just drawn. And we're going to work one whole shape at a time, working from top to bottom. So maybe now I'll start with the purple, just to tone back this pink a little bit. And I'm going to go across all the way till I get to my shape. When I get to my shape, I'm going to draw around that shape and then connect it. I'm using my little short choppy strokes. And then cleaning up that bead. I want to get it nice and wet. So when I work over here, I have to work this area because it's high as well. So I'm going to pull that bead down, working these two shapes at the same time. I can do it that way. When I get into a tight spot, I want to come up onto the tip. I don't want to go below until, okay, so I'm going to keep this bead coming down, and we're going to connect these two at the tip of that one leaf. So I'm just going to find that shape by painting around it. Okay, I'm going to let that bead sit for a minute. That's with the purple. Now you notice this is higher than this, so I've got to start making this shape here. So I'm going to pull it down like it's almost like a ruler. So I'm going to pull this down. Till I get to the edge of that shape. Pull this down. I got to come over here and work this. Let me load up a little bit. Maybe I'll change color now. So maybe I'll go into the blue. Oh, this time I'll go into the red. So this will overall end up being a very lavender painting. Just going to clean up that shape around that leaf. See, now I'm meeting this up again. I don't want to go too far down because I've got a spot up here. Go ahead and let's use the lavender so it doesn't look like I've changed, the stem changes the color. I want to have the same color on either side of the stem is my point. Okay, so now I'm going to work this bead down till I get to my cherry stems, or my berry stems. I want to make sure I keep that bead forming up. Even it up over here. Now I can go into that red. Pull that side down. Clean up the bead, let it sit there for a minute. Pull this side down. I go around that cherry stem. Gonna pull this down. Oh look, there's the shape that's the same elevation. So I'm pulling this red down. I get up on the tip of my brush as I get into a tight spot. I'll line that up. I come over here, finish this off, pull this down, keeping that bead at the same elevation, starting at the top, using my short choppy strokes. Maybe now, I think I'll take the red all the way for this layer. So we're just going to use red, violet, and red for this layer. Try to keep that shape nice and clean around the edges. Clean it up just a little. Try not to go up once I've come down, because I end up creating a mess. Okay, I've got this bead forming up. It's nice. I got to pull that over, level it off. This is why we want to work at a slant. See how this shape is ending, so I want to make sure I collect that excess water so it doesn't form a background. Okay, I'm giving up. I'm going into the ultramarine blue. It's such a pretty color down here. up that shape a little bit with one smooth stroke. Let's see, I'll start with the purple. I'm starting to lose my beads. I'm just going to poke a little more water into it. Okay. Just had a snowstorm here in Nevada, so I'm feeling wintry colors. I find there's a lot of purples in winter. Okay, can't go too far down though. I need to start this bead over on this side of the shape. So basically this layer is the purpose of this layer is to save the first layer of value and paint around it. Let's go ahead and finish that off with the blue. We'll do the same thing. We'll clean out our brush, get a thirsty brush, collect that excess that's forming, find our paper towel, wipe off the sides just in case. And I'll just keep collecting that bead. Kind of like those little spots of water on the berries. It just looks like a little bit of a bug bite. I'm going to get all the water out of my brush. I'm just going to clean up this edge just a tiny bit, soften that so it doesn't look like I didn't know what I was doing there. Okay, so that's the first layer of value. It's kind of hard to visualize the end game, but I'm going to go ahead and collect this water that's this extra pigment that's forming over here so it doesn't flow back in. And while it's wet, again, clean my brush and get it nice and damp, get most of the water out. I'm just going to, actually I kind of like that edge being a little ragged on the leaf. Got a couple of divots there, we'll find it in the next layer. Okay, we'll go to the next layer now. And now we can overlap the first layer with the second layer, but again, we don't want to overlap on the same layer. So, I'll go ahead and make some big leaves here and start to break up these shapes. I want that to come off the page like that, but again, can't overlap with this one because it's on the same layer, but I can overlap both of these. I don't think I want to do that. Do want to overlap a little bit, but I don't want these to be going in exactly the same direction, and I think I will put a stem. Connector does overlap, but that's okay. Right now I want to put a branch that's coming down here, and maybe I want another berry back in here. A new layer and a branch that goes up into there. I think it'll be okay to have branches overlapping. So that's a leaf, and then maybe I want to have another berry out there, and a stem comes in to those berries. Let's put some more berries over here. I think I need some berries hiding behind leaves. I don't like the shape of that leaf. I'll go ahead and do that. and have some berries up in here. Got some berries hiding there. Again, I don't want to overlap. I do want to have a leaf coming off of here. I don't want to point off the page, but I can take it off the page and make that a better shape and a better angle. So I want to overlap this layer. And perhaps a leaf like that. And a leaf coming in there. Maybe a leaf coming down in here. It's probably enough. I'm going to try to clean up this shape a little bit here. Where I start. Very gentle. Just soften that back a little bit. I don't want to get too far down. The blue lifts pretty easy. Don't have any overlapping. I don't want to have this overlap the stem so much. Okay. Alright, so this will stay at the second layer, this will stay at the first layer, or the third layer. Okay, so I need my paint again, my red. Again, I want to keep it fairly weak, I don't want it too strong, because I'm going to let the layering build the value. So my ultramarine blue. And then a combination of the two. A nice harmonious. I actually don't need to mix up this violet here because I have both colors. I can do it on the page, but I'll go ahead and do it. We want an analogous painting. In other words, all the colors are adjacent on the color wheel. Red to blue. So from red to violet to blue. So I'm going to get some more blue in there. Do not want to run out. The very last layer I might use some really strong paint, but for now we're going to keep it pretty thin. Okay, I think I'll start with the red. So now I have a closed shape, so I don't have to be as nervous. Got the stem. Use the tip of my brush. This brush is about had it. About time I need to get a new one, so it's kind of rough at the tip. I can pull that down. And close that shape off. Do you see how that's a closed shape now? So I want to collect that excess water and not let it pool there while I move on. So I'm just going to work these negative shapes. So because I used red there, I need to use red at least on the immediate other side of the stem, so it doesn't look like the stem stops the color. With just the red. Start up here, so this is a closed shape, so I can work this whole shape without having to worry about working over here. Now that I've started it, this is a closed shape here too. So let me go ahead and finish this one. I'm going to switch to the purple so it doesn't look too homogeneous there. I'm going to go ahead and work this shape fairly quickly. pull that bead down right to the edge of that shape. Collect the extra water so it doesn't pool. Back there and do that. Okay, so I started this shape. I'm going to get back to it now. Start with red on there. I'm going to find that whole berry shape with red. Now I'm going to switch to the purple. Bring that value down. This is a little bit higher here on this side of the stem. I want to make sure I keep that path open. Otherwise it'll create a background over there. So I worked that closed shape. Here's another closed shape. I want to start with red because that's where I ended on that side of the stem. Just do that whole closed shape. I'm going to switch to purple. And close that shape off. Okay, I want to make sure my line continues behind there. I've got this closed shape here. So I'll start with the purple. Keep pulling that bead down. Close that shape off. Clean up that shape. Suck up the extra water. Water's starting to pool there. I want to keep my eye on those. Okay, now I have this shape starts here, so I have to catch all of this here because it meets back down in here. So I'll start up here with the red very briefly and then go right into the purple. I think I'm going to go to blue. Start pulling that blue down. Now this is higher, so I have to bring that down to here. Work that whole closed shape. Go back. I'm going to drop in some of the purple. Come around. Or violet. Okay, now this is higher, so I'm going to bring that violet that I started on the other side of the stem. Find the tip of that leaf. So all I'm doing is painting the negative shape. Okay, then I continue with the shape at this end. It goes higher there, so I'm going to bring that down. Clean up that berry shape. Clean up that leaf shape. Close off that negative space. Okay, so this shape is all in here, so let's go ahead and start with the violet because that's what's on the other side of the stem. Actually, I'm going to poke a little red in there. Okay. Bring that down. Start over on this side of the stem because ultimately it's the same negative shape. Go ahead and switch to blue. This is the same height over here, so now I'm connecting that negative shape. Pull it down. Put a little thorn there. Up on the tip, find that edge. Put a little thorn. A ragged edge on that leaf. Close that shape off with the stem. Okay, suck up that extra water. So there we have blue. I'm going to make sure I collect that extra water with a thirsty brush so it doesn't pool back up. Starting to see the process now. So I'm starting with blue. I'm going to put a little bit of red in there because it's still a little violet. I don't want it to look like the stem is stopping the leaf. There's a stem. Come around the berry. This eventually connects, so it's higher. I need to make sure I'm working it. I want to see that whole negative shape and plan that all around. So now it's connected underneath this berry. Just clean up that shape as much as I can. Let's go ahead and grab some red. Finish off with bright red over here. Collect the extra water. So I've done that shape, haven't done this shape, so use the red. That's what's on the other side of the leaf. Pull that bead. Pull it on down. Collect the extra water. So now we have 1, 2, 3 layers of value. So this is the third layer of value that we're laying down. We've saved the second layer. Got to get inside these little spaces in here. So this was kind of the purpley color. So I want to find this shape here. Call out that extra berry back in there. And this shape right here also. Got a stem, another stem back in there. Clean up that stem shape. Great. A little too far down with that shape. I'm going to just try to lift it back just a little. It's better not to fuss. Okay, so now we have a couple of different stages, so you can see kind of what happens in the different stages. This isn't the best line there. I should leave it alone. Leave it alone. Clean it up later, hopefully. Right, so I have a whole bunch of these paintings in process, and I want to just show you the fourth layer that we're going to paint. So first we're going to save or plan our shapes just like we did on the previous 2 layers. Add more berries, add more leaves. Again, we don't want to overlap on the same layer or touch. We want to, but we can overlap with previous layers, and we want to keep going behind the existing shapes. and planting berries that don't touch on the same layer but can overlap on the previous layer. Add in some leaves. I like to make sure I work the corners. You don't have to put the entire shape on the page. Work the edges just like it's a snapshot of a photograph. Remember, you're putting the leaves behind so that those first layers will never be covered up that we saved. I actually don't really like that shape. I want it to be more horizontal. Okay, that's good. Now I want to tape down this painting. I previously had it taped down. As you can see, there's a nice white border. So I want to get the tape lined up like we did before. So a secret to taping, I'm using artist tape here, is to measure, pull and measure with your thumbnail first, and then rip the tape. You'll end up wasting a lot less tape this way. Go all the way across the corners. The corners are really important. Get a really good seal on that tape. Okay, we're ready to go now. I've got my paint pre-mixed and ready to go. I'm going to work from the top down just like I did before. Starting with the red, and I'm working the same latitude. I don't really need to because I've got a lot of closed shapes here. But it's best to work from left to right if you're right-handed, right to left if you're left-handed, and work every closed shape from the top down. You work that direction so you don't get the palm of your hand into wet paint. So it's dangerous to work the other way around. But I like to brace the palm, the heel of my hand on the board to keep myself steady. But I'm still doing the pulling the bead with the same strength, maybe coffee strength, but pretty much the same strength pigment that I've used in every previous layer. I'm going to find now the next layer of values. I'm going to save all the shapes and paint around them. So the first, second, and third layer, now I'm saving the saving the third layer of shapes, painting the fourth bead pull. So when I start with end with blue on one side of the stem, I want to make sure I start with blue on the other side so it doesn't look like the stem stops the color. We said this in all the previous layers. So there's blue there. I want to start with blue, but it's kind of a violet, so I'm adding a little violet, finding that tip of the leaf there, finding those extra berries back into the distance. It's nice to have different value layers. So in the end, we'll have 4 different value layers. After this wash, we'll have painted 4 values and saved 3 shapes of value. We're going to do at least one more layer of really dark, thick paint. But I'm pulling the bead for all these close shapes. It's not as stressful now because the shapes are much smaller. And I don't have to keep the bead going across the whole latitude of the painting. Right? Catch those little side shapes. There's a stem there. I want to stop there. Make sure you leave an edge so the water doesn't flow back up into that other shape. Clean up the edges. Clean up that extra pooling water. I'm going to clean up that little drip that I have there on that leaf. Just gently kind of wipe it up, lift it up. Ultramarine blue is a pretty lifting pigment. Let me go ahead and get rid of these tumors on this berry. It's a little unusual shape there. Be very gentle when you do that so you don't go back too far down and pick up too many layers. The less you do correcting, the better you are. Oh, I missed a couple of little shapes for this value layer, so I'm going to go ahead and finish those off. Standing back and looking at your painting is really important so you don't miss things. There we go. Pretty close to done with this layer. And then I'm going to move into the next layer, which will be using dark, thick paint. So unfortunately I didn't get video of the planning stage, but I planned the shapes just like I did in the previous 4 layers. Now I'm using the 5th layer, and instead of going in with tea strength or coffee strength paint, now I'm doing very thick, creamy to buttery paint. But I'm using the same 2 colors, or at least the same 2 color values. I've changed my red to a darker value red. I'm using, it's called Crimson Lake by Holbein. But if you've got permanent alizarin crimson, that's the same family as quinacridone rose, you can use that. But I want it to be really dark, but it's still cool. It's important to keep it in the same family and have a cool red, and don't go into an orangey red. So a cool red will be towards purpley. A warm red will be towards orange. So don't bring in orangey paint, because that'll just make it look kind of dull and dark. We kind of learned that in the first class, how important it is to stay more adjacent when you're trying to get pretty secondary colors. I had those spurious tools on my right side, and I'm tripping over them, so you got to get them out of the way. All right, finding those stems, remember, I'm just going in with dark, creamy paint now, and look at how it makes the image just pop. This is probably my favorite part of the stage, is coming in with the darks. But you plan the shapes just like you did in the previous layers with your pencil ahead of time. And so then you have your little map as you go. Crimson Lake and Ultramarine Light, just like I did the previous layers, except I've changed my quinacridone rose out. Oh, I want to add a couple shapes. Those shapes are too big to be all dark, so I'm adding a couple of berries in there so that I don't like to have these shapes too big in the dark. I like the ragged edge on that leaf. I don't know what kind of berries these are, but it could be a bug bite, it could be just the leaf pattern. Okay? You don't have to work top down, you can work just dark shapes. But just to keep the practice going right, I would work from the top down and try to work from left to right. So I probably, it gets kind of dangerous to work the right side of the painting before I've worked on my left side, but here I go. Sometimes I don't pay attention to myself. But if I go over to the left now before I'm completely dry, I could get my heel of my hand into that dark area. But look at how this dark layer really makes the image pop. It's just fun to see all those different value layers. I'm just working those negative shapes. I'm not painting berries and leaves, I'm painting around the berries and leaves. I'm finding the shapes by painting around them. Okay, some little shapes in there. I've got berries, berries, berries. Just kind of want to, and I'm always going back into the painting for this method. It ends up looking a little bit like a woodcut or a relief print or something in the end. All the edges are fairly hard, not a lot of soft edges. Pulling the bead, it's a real classic method of painting. All right, now I'm moving over to the left side. I want to be careful not to put my hand in the wet paint, so it's a little more awkward to hold on the brush. I do like to make one corner dark, and remember to keep the size horizontal and vertical in a corner different so that it's not equal both horizontally and vertically. I'm turning that one into a berry just for that reason. But I do like to make at least one corner of the dark. Right, I've got a shape in here. I've got to be careful I don't put my heel into wet paint because I didn't work right to left like the teacher said. You don't really have to pull the bead on this dark layer because the bead actually won't form up very well. Getting close to being finished, and I just love this because now it gets, I want to get a little corner showing there, just a little subtle corner, just so I can find a leaf behind there. I might have an issue with confusion of shape there. I'll figure that out after I stare at it for a little bit. That's why we don't want to overlap shapes on the same layer. Pretty close to done here. Yeah, now this is been sped up. I'm not painting this fast. It's actually about 3 times as fast as what I would normally paint it. But I forgot to get the audio, so I've compensated in this way. So the last thing I want to do on this guy is a little bit of cleanup, like this right here. I'm going to get a wet brush, put a little bit of water there, let it sit for a minute, and then just sort of soften that mistake there. I don't want to push very hard because I want to keep the sense of this almost woodcut kind of feeling to it. I just want to mask that mistake just a little bit. Same thing there. Looks like a pencil mark. I am going to just hint at a few berry, where the stem comes into the berry. I'll hint at a couple of those. Maybe add those in as positive things, positive shapes rather than all negative. There we go. Just give it a little sense of dimension. And then I wanted to, this is what I was talking about overlapping shapes on the same layer. I have some confusion of shape right here, so I'm going to go ahead and use my T-strength and just, I'm going to glaze over this leaf back here because it's just too much the same as these two shapes. So while I have that purple in there, I'll go ahead and put some blue in there. So I'm just using my T-strength paint there. I just want to separate that shape. Separate this leaf from these two. And I don't know if that was the right call, but I did it. Okay, and then I want to do a little bit of splattering. So just because I've got some random splatters and I just want to make them make sense. So I'm going to splatter with all three colors. So I'm taking my brush and I'm hitting it against something hard. And that'll kind of make those splatters okay. And you know, all leaves and outside stuff have bug bites. So we want to just do something a little more random in there with all three colors. You can also splatter like that, but I find it tends to do some things I don't like when I do that. So maybe I'll knock them back a little bit just so they're not too apparent. They look really bright right now. Okay, just a little bit of fun splatter. So I am going to go one more layer back on this. So I'm going to get my strong red, cool red, Carmine Lake by Holbein, or Crimson Lake or something like that. And I'm just going to go one more layer back and just a couple of really dark darks. So I'm just going to break up this shape. I don't know what it is, but I want to make it dark. And just cut all those in half a little bit. So I'm going to go back one more layer to dark. Even darker layer. So anything that's relatively big, I'm just basically going to cut it in half. Put there like that. Maybe make another leaf back in there. You might not even be able to tell, but this is super thick, almost buttery paint. So I'll come up here like this. kind of want to sort of get a hint of leaf shapes, you know, curves, but I'm not that worried about it. I just want to take these big shapes with my really buttery paint and make some really dark. So I'm going to go back one more time. So in your directions I said 5 times, but this is number 6 layer. Just going to break that up. It might not even show, but it might be super cool too. We'll make that something halfway, put that halfway. It just really cool. So this one I kind of already did dark, so I'm gonna make it look like that dark shape is something. Yeah, I'm gonna like that better, so I put that back. I have kind of a tangent there, so I'm gonna bring that leaf shape so it doesn't, the back of this leaf doesn't share an edge. So those are the kind of things that I'm finding. So I kind of want to overlap that point a little bit into this leaf back here. Had a tangent. Okay, this is looking good. I'm going to continue that little corner of dark. Clean up that shape. So I have dark right there. So then I'm going to find a little leaf back here. So there's that leaf. So I'm going to find it in there on these little stems. Hint at that stem edge going up there. Clean up this berry edge a little bit. Make it a little rounder. Same with this one. Just a little, I don't want to overdo this because it'll lose its sense of what I wanted to have a sense of. I think that's good. Do half of this dark. I think I did already, but it's not really showing, so I'm going to do it again. And this here. So really buttery, hardly any water, going in and creating this dark shape right there. Okay. Find that dark bit there. That is enough. We are going to stop this now with one more stroke.